This is your usual suspect. Welcome back to yet another live broadcast on your favorite football updates channel. It's a pleasure to be back on this beautiful Friday evening slash night, depending on wherever it is that you're joining us from. It's 7 minutes past the hour of 9 p.m. As I did promise you, on Fridays we'll be coming a lot earlier because of other engagements. So basically, that's what is happening. We are here early. Basically, that's what is happening. Apologies. I was just having audios tested on another device just to make sure our microphones are in great shape, or that nothing goes bizarre, contrary to what our expectations should be in as far as this broadcast is concerned. Anyways, should I put this here? I'm trying to figure out where the best place for it will be. But I hope you're all doing okay. I hope you've had a wonderful day. Hi, Pedri. Welcome back to the channel. I hope you're good. Yeah, see how we got our predictions. I got for Barcelona wrong. I was waiting for you to return on the channel so that we can talk about it. But it's taken you that long to return. But it's always a pleasure to see you around. So thank you for sparing the time. Anyways, we are back once again to review what's going to come over the course of the weekend. We did we did part of that in the morning. We did that part of that in the morning when we did the preview for some of the games that will be coming your way this weekend. Particularly, we focus was on the Premier League, where it will continue for tonight. For the games that will come on Sunday, and then we'll go elsewhere across Europe, where we do expect action actually to also be coming through over the weekend. The Premier League is entering match day 16. Like I said, after match day 16, we'll only have 3 games to reach the halfway point of the season. So things are beginning to, when the season approaches that, mid halfway season point, then we can no longer say, still are in the season, and things like that. So anyways, as we get into this is some breaking news coming through from Fabrizio Romano saying that Mo Salah recalled to the Liverpool squad for the game against Brighton at Anfield. I mean, I did watch Anna Slot speak about the thing regarding Mo Salah, and he did say at the pre-match press conference that he was slated to have a meeting with the 33-year-old Egyptian international after the press conference, and then that the contents of that meeting would then inform his involvement or lack of involvement in as far as the weekend was concerned. Remember that Liverpool have a date against Brighton and Hove Albion. That is a game we did preview in the morning. They have that game against Brighton and Hove Albion before Mo Salah can leave the club to go off for the international break. Sorry, not the international break, but for the Africa Cup of Nations that is going to be hosted in Morocco, kicking off on the 21st of December, going on to into the early 20s of January. So that is what is happening. There's that expectation. Now, when he mentioned that, he said, of course, he could not foretell how the discussion would go. So he simply said, it will depend on how if the discussion goes. Let's see how it goes, and possibly we will see how things come about in that regard. And if it's an okay, you will see the results of that quite quickly if he's involved. That means matters have been resolved or issues have been resolved. I do not know for a fact whether apologies have been exchanged in either direction or form or shape. I do not know that to be a statement of fact, but you hope that the discussion were mature, that were fruitful, but at least his involvement in the matchday squad for the game against Brighton is a sign or a point in the right direction to that effect. So that's there as well. Then also in the other news, still regarding the Premier League, before we get into the thick of the action, is that today Arsenal reached a deal with Deal to become their sleeve sponsors. Remember, at the end of this current season, they will bring an end to their, I think, what, 4 year relationship with Visit Rwanda. That's been going on. I do not know whether it's whether Rwanda, in terms of Rwanda, Visit Rwanda as a project, as a program, could no longer run the sponsorship, but it's coming to an end at the end of the season. Now, it's not on any bad terms whatsoever. It's just the end of the contract. Perhaps I do not know whether both sides explored the renewal of the deal and could not come to terms or to an agreement, but at least deal will be taking over that spot on Arsenal's sleeves for to be their new sponsors. So that's also the other news are coming in from the Premier League in as far as some of your clubs are concerned. So, like I said, let's get straight into the thick of it. There will be no early kickoffs this weekend. Like I said, the first 2 games will come at 6 p.m. On Saturday, 13th. Excuse me. Will come on Saturday, the 13th of December at 6 p.m. when Chelsea entertain Everton. We've already gone through those games. We've given our predictions. And then Liverpool will be up against Brighton and Hove Albion. We also previewed that game as well. You'll excuse me for a second. Excuse me for a second. What happened? She fell? Did she fall? You removed? Oh, sorry. You just remove glasses for her. You just remove the glass for her. That is cool. So you're going that side? Oh, sorry about that. Apologies, my people. There was an accident. Call it a minor accident. It got a kid crying so loud that I needed to go out, check out, see what the situation was and help out, So apologies for that. It's not very often that I walk away from a broadcast. But please indulge me on this one. Why is the baby crying? Should we join the live too? Yeah. Thanks, Alex, for joining. I had stepped away because the kid was crying so much. I do not know what the reason was, but it got me concerned that I had to step away. They were on the outside, but I needed to find out what was going on, given, neighbors help one another. So you never know what's happening, and you cannot keep a deaf ear on everything that happens within your ranges. So anyways, we are back for the conversation. So apologies on that already. I know it's very unprofessional to step away from a live, but yeah, some things are more important in life. Anyways, like I said, Liverpool will be up against Brighton, Burnley will take on Fulham, Arsenal will be up against Wolverhampton Wanderers. Now, for the Saturday fixtures, we previewed most of those, so they are not going to be part of the priority. I'm not saying we won't touch them tonight, but they won't be part of the priority. I will move on to Sunday fixtures. We did preview, the Saturday fixtures in our morning broadcast. So on Sunday, Crystal Palace will be up against Manchester City. Nottingham Forest will take on Tottenham Hotspur, while Sunderland will be at home against Newcastle. Food for thought, Sunderland are yet to lose a game at home in the Premier League this season. For some of the games they've lost, they've been away from home. And nonetheless, they've not lost that many, but they lost against Burnley, I think. They lost against Manchester United. They lost against Manchester City. I'm trying to remember which one the other was, against Fulham by 0-0. So yeah, And then West Ham United will be at home against Aston Villa. That's for all the 5 p.m. Kickoff fixtures. And then at 7:30 p.m. it will be Brentford up against Leeds United, with Manchester United coming up against Bournemouth at 11 p.m. on Monday Night Football. So we will reserve the Monday Night Football game for Manchester United for Monday, but maybe we'll get to tackle a few things in regards to the team news in this broadcast. So Manchester City, I mean, they are one of the teams to beat. And the reason as to why I say that is because they are the only team in the last, I think, more than 10 years to have won the Premier League back to back. The only team. You have to go back to as far back as 2007 to 2009 to find another team that won the Premier League back to back, So, and then in the 9 years of Pep Guardiola, this being his 10th, he won the Premier League title at least 6 times out of those. Out of the 9, he only conceded it in the first season to Chelsea, and then for 2 seasons against Liverpool. So when I say that they are a team to beat, I bring it in that spirit and in that context. I, for one, when the season was starting, my prediction was that they would finish 4th on the Premier League table. Why? Because I thought they were going to be still a team in transition, and that they still are. However, really in transition, they have performed, not surprisingly, but much better than I had anticipated they would perform. For example, when they went away to Arsenal, in whatever circumstances you may have viewed them, and got a 1-1 draw, that was a good result. When they beat up against Liverpool, regardless of whatever form you may view Liverpool in, by 3-0, that was a brilliant result. Last weekend, the way they dismissed Sunderland, is Sunderland that side that we know can be really, really a hard nut to crack. That was another telltale sign, of how good a team they are. Let's not forget, they beat Manchester United equally by 3-0. So when you look at some of their results, some of the emphatic results, you can't help it think, and at the moment, they are breathing down the neck of Arsenal with only 2 points behind. The beauty for Arsenal is that this weekend they will get to play before Manchester City play. So usually, if you are ahead of your opponent and you play before they do, you it's not to say that you determine your destiny, but whatever the result you get puts your opponent under pressure. In other words, if Arsenal were to lose to Wolves, God forbid, or if they were to draw, it puts Manchester City on pressure to win their game to ensure that they can leapfrog Arsenal. And if Arsenal do win, which I predicted that they would go on to win by 3-0, in my opinion, then it also puts Manchester City still under pressure to win and maintain that gap to a mere 2 points, which it is at the current moment. However, they do come up against a very, very tough opponent. Not tough by the size of his stature of the club, but tough by the way he plays and the kind of manager that he has, who we know has sort of proved to be a tactical masterpiece, masterminding victories against big sides. We've seen how in 3 games this season, he's unbeaten against Liverpool. Beat them in the Community Shield, 3-2 on penalties that proceeded a 2-2 draw. Beat them by 2-1 at Selhurst Park. Beat them by 3-0 at Anfield in the EFL Cup. So Oliver Glasner has put himself in that mold. When he transposes his tactical aptitudeness to Manchester City, we are brought to the fact that he got the better of Pep Guardiola in the finals of the FA Cup last season when they beat up against Man City by 1-0. That goal scored by Ebeleche Eze that got Crystal Palace to win their first, their first trophy in the entirety of their history. So that's as impressive as Oliver Glasner has been. However, it is also a sad or perhaps a kind reminder that he does not particularly have a very good record against Manchester City in as far as the Premier League is concerned. Nonetheless, he will take solace in knowing that at least last season he managed to get a point of Pep Guardiola at Selhurst Park. It's not always an easy fixture, but somehow Manchester City tend to find ways to win. Because when you go back in terms of form for the last 5 meetings between the two sides, you find that Man City have at least 3 victories out of those 5 meetings. Really, they've been 2 all draws on 2 occasions. And one has been at Selhurst Park, that was last season. And then when you went things further back, last season but one, the other was at the Etihad Stadium. Crystal Palace, or not just Crystal Palace, but also we've noticed the trend that teams that are playing in Europe, particularly teams that play in the UEFA Europa League and the UEFA Conference League, for which Crystal Palace are playing in the latter, is that they tend to struggle in weekends post those games. And the result for that is that sometimes they've had to travel long journeys, and then we're talking about a Crystal Palace side whose squad depth is not that big. And so those are factors. Because Manchester City played a day earlier than them, they get an extra days of rest. And if you need any evidence of how that can be a difference maker, retreat back to the game between Arsenal and Chelsea, for which Chelsea had an extra day of rest prior to that London derby, and we all remember how it went down. Now, it's not a given that just because a team played on Thursday, you will get the better of them over the weekend. It's not a given. But it's just to put things or matters into context in what gives Manchester City the advantage for this particular fixture. If we are to look at recent form from all sides, is that Manchester City have literally had it their way but one occasion. Because in the last 5, they've only lost 1 game. And that was the 2-1 defeat against Newcastle. Other than that, prior to that, they had beaten up against Liverpool by 3-0, went and beat up against Leeds by 3-2 at the Etihad Stadium before going to Craven Cottage, where they won by 5-4. And then their last league outing, like I said, was a 3-0 victory against Sunderland. Very impressive Manchester City side. In sharp contrast, on the side of Crystal Palace, you have at least they have 3 victories, 1 defeat, and 1 draw in their last 5. Those victories coming up against teams like Wolves, Burnley, and Fulham. Particularly the one against Fulham, edging it by 2-1, was a little bit of a surprise for me, because given the manner in which Fulham had fought so hard against Manchester City, I had thought that they would scrap out a point off of that. But it was never meant to be. So the only game they've lost in the last 5 was against Man United at Selhurst Park by 2-1. We remember Joshua Zirkzee and Mason Mount scoring in that game to cancel out Jean-Philippe Mateta's a penalty that had given Crystal Palace the lead. But prior to, and then the only draw was a goalless draw against Brighton and Hove Albion. So when you compare all those factors, when you bring all those factors together, regardless of the venue, Manchester City still have the advantage. They are the bigger team. They have the better squad. They have the better players, pound for pound. I do not think that there's a player that you're going to pull out of that Crystal Palace team to play in this Manchester City team to start. Maybe, and just this is just a maybe. Maybe you get to pull out Daniel Munoz and play him as a Manchester City right back. Just thinking, maybe could McGahey portray through that starting 11? I do not know. Hi LFC, it's good to have you back. It's been a while. I hope you're doing okay. Merry Christmas to you too. Early wishes of Merry Christmas when we still have about 13 days, 12 days to eat. So anyways, thank you so much. So last season, I also do remember this particular fixture. Crystal Palace went to the Etihad Stadium and got a 2-0 lead very early in the game. Ebeleche Eze in the 8th minute, Christy Richards, is that his name? Is it Christy? I forget. I think it's Christy or Christian Richards scored in the 21st minute to make it 2-0. However, that's a game that reminded us that really Kevin De Bruyne was in his final season of in Manchester City colours. He was still the player that we all love to watch, because he provided a couple of assists in that game and scored what was the fifth goal. But Omar Mamush scored to pull one back, and then that was in the 36th minute. And then Mateo Kovacic scored to restore parity. Then James McAtee, O'Reilly, and Kevin De Bruyne literally blew Crystal Palace away. In fact, Kevin De Bruyne scored their first goal because that goal came in the 33rd minute. Yes, that was the goal that he scored. And then 3 minutes later, Omar Mamush scored to make it 2-2. And that's how Crystal Palace looked lost. But like I said, being at Selhurst Park in that sort of small confined space, gives them a bit of an advantage. The home crowd being behind them. They just returned from the UEFA Conference League with the win against Shelbourne by 3-0. I think it was Eddie Nketiah, Uche, and Jeremy Pino who scored in that game yesterday. Can't stay. I'm seeing Santa for an experience. Really, LFC is ditching us for Santa, of all things. Anyways, I wish you the very best of your experience. I wouldn't have seen that coming, but it is what it is. So, in terms of team setup, we saw Manchester City themselves are fresh from that, wonderful victory against Real Madrid, beating up against Real Madrid by 2-1. Brad Erling Haaland and Nico O'Reilly scoring in that game for Manchester City. Really, Rodrigo Goes, who Pep Guardiola really heaped a lot of praises on how good he is in the aftermath of that game, scored what turned out to be a mere consolation, although it had been the lead in that game for Real Madrid. So, how does the team set up for this particular game? If you are Oliver Glasner and you want to get something off of this Manchester City side, how do you set up? Of course, Dean Henderson in goal, Richards, Lacrosse, McGahey, you'd expect those to be in your back three, because we know they play the system similar to that of Man United with 3-4-2-1 kind of system with 2 number 10s. However, recently they've been playing 2 number 9s, one playing as the 10. Jean-Philippe Mateta playing in the same game alongside Eddie Nketiah, because Ismail Sarr had suffered an injury, and I do not know if he will be back on time for this particular game. I need to confirm when it comes to injuries there for Crystal Palace. But last I checked, he was still out with an ankle injury alongside Jade Covet, but that one was out through illness. Daniel Munoz had a knee injury. Chuck Diakore, as well as Caleb Copper, were some of the injured figures there. So you'd expect to see at least Adam Wharton and Taichi Kamada in that central midfield pairing, and then you'll see Tyreek Mitchell. Then you expect to see Nathan Elkleiny, Jeremy Pino, Eddie Nketiah, and Jean-Philippe Mateta. Like I said, Crystal Palace's squad is not that broad in terms of depth with talent as well, because over the bench you're going to have players like Jefferson Lemar, players like Uche, Will Hughes, the likes of Jeffrey Schirrap have since left the club. We know that Joachim Anderson left the club and is now, I think, the captain at Fulham, and things like that, really. So, but that's how you'd expect to set up. For Manchester City, it's a really hard one to call. At least, okay, there's some figures you'd expect to see, like Gianluigi Donnarumma, maybe Nico Gonzalez in the number 6 role. Then you expect Brad Erling Haaland. But when it comes to all the other figures, Pep Guardiola can decide to cut and chop anytime he feels like, because one, he has the manpower, but also because he has a lot of quality in his squad depth, he overly rotates his team to give other players playing time. So in that game against Real Madrid, we saw Omar Mamush came off the bench and Savinho. They could get to start this one. However, if I'm him, I'd brought Erling Haaland, I'd keep Jeremy Doku in that team. Phil Foden then should be in that team. Then Ryan Checky, that one, chances are he could start on the bench. But at least given how good he was against Real Madrid, I'd keep him. Then the midfield trio, like I said, Foden in it, Nico Gonzalez, who do you add to them? Tijan Reinders or Bernardo Silva? I'm thinking Tijan Reinders because he did not start that game against Real Madrid. And that's the kind of quality they have and depth within their squad, that even though Tijan Reinders, that you start a game and Tijan Reinders, who we know how good he really is, and he's starting on the bench. That's how good they are, Manchester City. In terms of their backline, we saw Ruben Diaz, Joško Vardiol, Nico O'Reilly, and Matas Nunez. So in this one, do not be surprised if you see a Kushanov at right back, and you see a Ryan Ashnory at left back, and you see a Nathan Aki. I don't know if John Stones is available for Manchester City, but that's just to say that they do have, John Stones is absent through a thigh injury. But that's to say that they do have the players, Maybe Ruben Diaz starts alongside, what's his name? Nathan Aki. You never know. Anything can happen with Pep Guardiola. So we'll have to wait and see. Either way, I don't know. I'm going to go with the Manchester City win. For Man City to win this game by 2-1. I feel it will be close, or could be close, but Manchester City will find a way to edge it. Otherwise, we wouldn't want to view them in the same form or shape that we view Chelsea in, as an inconsistent team. Anyways, allow me to leave that game at that. I think we've spent enough time on it. Then quickly, the game between Nottingham Forest and Tottenham Hotspur. We know that Sean Dyche is still, trying a few things here and there, but results have gone his way in the larger context of things, in my opinion. Whereas they lost their last game by 3-0 against Everton, which was a surprise result for me, because I had expected a draw in that one, given the sort of style of both managers. But, Everton sort of took me by surprise. The same way Brighton went away to the City Stadium and they beat up against, Nottingham Forest by 2-0. But they've lost 2 in the last 5 and won 3. They're not a team that draw very often. At least that's not what they want to show. In comparison, Tottenham Hotspur on the other side have lost 2, have drawn 2, and won 1. Their win coming against Brentford by 2-0. Draws against Newcastle and Man United 2-2. Losses to Arsenal and to Fulham, both London derbies. So they didn't do well in that one. Last season, Nottingham Forest beat up against Tottenham Hotspur home and away by 0-0 and 2-1 at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. Now, we're talking about a different Tottenham, not in terms of overall squad and players, but in terms of the men that are in the dugout. Whereas when you look at the look of the Premier League table, Tottenham do not look much different from the team they were last season. At this stage in the season, you ought to think that tomorrow's game will be slightly different in terms of their performance. When you go back to the season prior to last, and that's the 2023-2024 season, Tottenham also beat up against Nottingham Forest, home and away, by 3-1 and 2-0. And then there's also a 3-1 victory for Tottenham Hotspur for the season prior to that. So it's a fixture that Tottenham has dominated, but last season, because they were shambolic in the Premier League, went on to lose as many as 22 games, which culminated into the sacking of Ange Postecoglou. Really still had been the manager to win them a piece of silverware for the first time in 17 years, when they won the UEFA Europa League, beating up against Man United by 0-0, that goal by Brennan Johnson in the final at San Mamés. They still showed him the exit. Thomas Frank. They've struggled with home form, but away from home, they've done fairly well. They come into this fixture on the back of a 3-0 victory against Slavia Praha in the UEFA Champions League. 2 penalties, one from Muhammad Kudus, another from Xavi Simons, while the other was, I think, an own goal by David Zime in that game. So then Nottingham Forest have been well rested throughout they were in action on Thursday. Apologies on that. And they won their game by 2-1. I remember Igor Jesus came on from the bench and scored in, I think, 40 seconds since coming off from the bench. Then the other goal was by, I'm forgetting his name. Oh, what's his name? His name is eluding me. His name is eluding me. But Nottingham Forest did win. Was it against Utrecht? They won. Yes, against Utrecht. That was that was their opponent last night, and they won that game. They came out on top. Calmuendo, yes, Calmuendo was the other goal scorer in that game, which they won. So I'm going to go on a leap of faith and say this game will end in a draw. I'm not too confident to give Tottenham a victory. Neither am I too confident to think that suddenly Nottingham Forest are going to bounce back and blow away Tottenham Hotspurs. It still can happen. Both teams could end up relying on set pieces or dead ball situations and things like that. In terms of the fixture itself, I do not expect it to be very, very entertaining. On the ice, I expect it to be a bit of a 50-50, and that's why I think the two sides will cancel each other out and settle for a 1-1 draw. It's just a prediction, might I add. So we'll leave that one at that as well. Then quickly, Sunderland, Newcastle. Sunderland have not lost a game at home in the Premier League this season. When you go to the Premier League table, they are well off. None of us would have estimated that Sunderland would be as high as 9th on the Premier League table at this stage in the season. And by the way, this Premier League table is a bit, what's the right word to use? I do not want to say misleading. I don't want to say, allow me to use the word disguised. It's a bit disguised in a way, because whereas your position tells your efforts through the season so far, when you look on the tally of points and you look at the disparity between, let's say, the team in 10th, which is Liverpool, who have 23 points. When you look at the disparity of points between Liverpool in 10th place and Man United, and Chelsea, who are 5th on the Premier League table, it's only a difference of 2 points, because Man United and Chelsea, who occupy 6th and 5th places respectively, all have 25 points. So Sunderland equally have 23 points. In other words, a win can take them as high as possibly 5th, because of an inferior goal difference that they stay behind Crystal Palace, but level on 26 points. So remember, we came, I think, into match day 15. Manchester United were 12th on the Premier League table. After winning against Wolves, they climbed as high as 6th. So that's why I say it's a bit disguised. It's like it doesn't tell the whole story. It doesn't tell you the whole story until you look at the point differences between these teams. Only 2 points separate first and second. Only 3 points separate first and third. Only 4 points separate third and fourth. Only 1 point separates fifth and sixth. Only 2 points separate. Only 1 point separates sixth and seventh. Like that. It's just, in fact, 1 point gap. Largely. There's no team that is more than 4 points ahead of the team that is behind them. That's the reality of the Premier League table. So, whereas Sunderland take on Newcastle who are 12th on the Premier League table. Now, Newcastle 12th and Sunderland 9th, but the point difference is only one because Newcastle have 22 points. They've been doing well in the last couple of games. Really, they did not start the season very, very well. But over the last couple of games, they've gotten some really, really important results that are worth sort of, noting. So, for example, ever since losing 3-1 against Brentford, they've beaten up against Man City by 2-1. They blew away Everton, beating them by 4-1. They shared the spoils in a 2-2 draw with Tottenham Hotspur and beat up against Burnley by 2-1. So that's 3 victories in the last 4 and 1 draw and only 1 defeat in the last 5. On the other side of the aisle, Sunderland have not had it really, really easy. They have 2 draws in the last 5, 2-2 against Arsenal, 1-1 against Liverpool. They have a humbling defeat against Manchester City and a defeat against Fulham. And then they have a victory against Bournemouth in that game, which they needed to come from 2 goals down to win 3-2 at the Stadium of Light. Now, whereas their form on paper is worse in comparison to that of Newcastle, being at home, that home advantage is what tells you that they could get a result in this one. Then also, it's the final game for many of the African stars that are going to be leaving the club to go and represent their respective nations at the Africa Cup of Nations. By that, I mean players like Noah Sadiq. We know that the 2023 Africa Cup of Nations Young Player of the tournament, Simon Adingra, was not summoned to the Ivory Coast team, which I found a bit surprising. However, excuse me, I found it surprising, but nonetheless, the reasons or the justifications for it are really valid. First of all, if we are being honest, ever since switching our allegiances from Brighton and Hove Albion to Sunderland, he's not played too much football. But also, he's been out through injury. I think he's had is it a hamstring injury or a thigh injury or something? So even though he returned in that game against Man City, he came on in the 72nd minute and he played. So, but players like Traore, players like Noah Sadiki, players like Mandava, yes, Reynold Mandava will be going. Mukeide, those are some of the players that are going to be leaving to go for the Africa Cup of Nations. So, in other words, they need to get a result here. And then we'll look to move on for the foreseeable future when they will be missing some of their stars who are going away for AFCON. There's that player that scored against Liverpool. I'm trying to forget his name. Chamsdane Talby. Yes, Chamsdane Talby is going to go away with the Moroccan national team. So it's going to be another huge miss for them. Isidro needs to step up. So the game against Newcastle does come just right in time against the heavyweight of an opponent that Newcastle are, for Sunderland to get another statement victory before some of their stars go away for AFCON. Now, like I said, Newcastle have had stepped things up. Of course, in the Champions League, they've struggled in their last 2 games, losing to Olympic Marseille by 2-1, and then drawing against Bayer Leverkusen in a 2-2 draw, a game that they should have won, at least by 4-1. That's according to Dennis Jukes, a Newcastle fan who got to watch that game. He was giving us insights last night. He was part of our broadcast, really. So, I don't know. In terms of previous meetings, the last 5, because I do not want to overly rely on them, because this game back in 2017, 2016, that's when you're going to remember them. 2016, 2015, 2014, a 1-1 draw at St. James's Park, a 3-0 victory for Sunderland at home at the Stadium of Light, a 1-0 victory against Newcastle at the Stadium of Light, a 1-0 victory away to Newcastle, and a 3-0 victory. In other words, in those last 5 meetings, at no one point did Newcastle beat up against Sunderland. There's only a 1-all draw. Now, that's very telling to the context of the game, because in some of these fixtures, these are some of the fixtures sometimes that trump form. However, there's also such a thing as, a team that has your number. We're usually saying a team having your number. In other words, they can call you anytime they want to. In other words, they can beat you anytime they feel like, or wherever they find you. I'm trying to look for an example. Go back to Manchester United under the Sir Alex Ferguson era and look at how many times they beat up against Tottenham Hotspurs, regardless of whatever form they found Tottenham in. They just knew how to beat up against Tottenham Hotspurs. So it could be also the case that Sunderland, regardless of whatever form or shape you may find them in, they just know how to beat up against Newcastle. Now, Sunderland, ever since losing to Manchester City, have been a well-rested side. Really, Newcastle had responsibilities in the UEFA Champions League. And that is going to be a factor, whether you like it or not. It is always a factor. Because whereas Newcastle have a good squad as well, the core team largely does not change. The core team largely does not change. I'm going to go on a leap of faith here and say Sunderland will come out on top. I was tilting towards a draw, a 1-all draw. But I'm thinking Sunderland could nick this one by 2-1. And it's not too strange. They've nicked bigger games. Remember them at the Stamford Bridge, winning 2-1 against Chelsea? They are capable of that. That 3-2 victory against Bournemouth, really, they had gone 2 goals down. That's a telltale sign of a team that literally leaves it all on the turf when they are in a home fixture. So, let me know whether you have divergent views, but I'll go with the 2-1 victory for Sunderland in this one. Quickly, let's move away from that Sunderland-Newcastle game. West Ham, Aston Villa, we know West Ham have been struggling. We know their struggles too well. We know the kind of form Aston Villa are in. 8 games won in a row. They just returned from the UEFA Europa League, where they beat up against FC Basel, where Jadon Shaqiri still plays, by 2-1. Yuri Tielemans and Ivan Guessand scoring in that one. And they are the only team with a perfect run of form in terms of their last 5 fixtures. Their last being a sweet victory. I think possibly the sweetest victory they'll ever taste against Arsenal, beating them by 2-1, because that goal came late in the game by Emi Buendia. Meanwhile, Emi Buendia also provided the assist for that for what turned out to be the winning goal by Yuri Tielemans in that victory against FC Basel. So over the last 5 fixtures, they've been flawless. Yes, they've conceded goals because they had to grind it out against Brighton, one that came by 4-3, but nonetheless they won. They won 4-0 against Bournemouth, 2-1 against Leeds, 1-0 against Wolves, 2-1 against Arsenal, and 4-3 against Brighton. Now, you see that 1-0 victory against Wolves at home? I want that to be a kind reminder to Arsenal fans who think it's a given that they will beat up against Wolves. I know I predicted a 3-0 victory for the Arsenal, but it's not a given. They must earn it. Like Mikel Arteta said, they must earn the 3 points. They must work to earn the 3 points. So West Ham on the other side have not had it the worst compared to how they started the season, but have not had it the best either, because losing to Liverpool and drawing against Brighton, Manchester United, Bournemouth is not a good sign. Really, they managed to beat up against Burnley by 3-2. Now, when a team draws so many games, Either of two things is bound to happen. Either they are about to lose a game or they are about to win a game. Unfortunately for the Hammers, I think they are about to lose a game and they will be losing to Aston Villa. Last season, Aston Villa beat them at the West Ham Stadium, the London Stadium, by 2-1. Really, the reverse fixture, they managed to pick out a point. They're not in any convincing form, if we are being honest. So I'm going to go with a 2-1 win for Aston Villa in that one. Then the late kickoff of Brentford versus Leeds United. Brentford, I'm going for a Brentford win. Brentford to win 3-1 against Leeds. I know Leeds are in high spirits following that victory against Liverpool. Sorry, that 2-3 all draw against Liverpool. Prior to which they had beaten up against Chelsea by 3-1. When you run things further back against Man City, it was a painful 3-2 defeat, but they had given a good fight. In fact, they've scored as many as 8 goals in their last 3 fixtures. As many as 8 goals. Now, that's a lot of goals for a team like Leeds United. However, I think Brentford will turn out to be a little too big a frog for them to swallow, that they will have to choke on it. And that's why they will lose by 3-1. Monday Night Football, like I said, we'll only tackle this one slightly. Team news, according to Ruben Amorim, Maguire is still out. Matas Delit is still out. Benjamin Sesko, they'll have to see. You will perhaps have to pass a late fitness test if he's to make it to the squad, and things like that. But I think Man United have a decent squad available enough to go and beat up against a very former FC Bournemouth. Now, again, the thing about Bournemouth that Man United will have to worry about come Monday is that when a team loses so much, there comes to a point where it gets tired of losing. We call it, there's a term we used to call it. I can only remember it in Uganda. Okwechawa, team wetukana. It's like you go and play in a way that has nothing to lose. And when you play a team that has nothing to lose, it's a very, very dangerous team. I'm not saying Bournemouth have nothing to lose, but we'll get to review that fixture in full context come Monday. So let's park it on the side. Which game should we tackle in the Premier League before we move on? Any other game that you'd want us to revisit? Put it down in the comment section and then we can revisit it. At least 1 or 2 games from the games on Saturday. Otherwise, we could preserve that conversation for tomorrow and we move over to what's to come in as far as elsewhere in Europe is concerned. You know, but maybe let's talk about just the team news. Particularly for Arsenal, the fixture does come too early again for some of their players. Once again, Mikel Arteta was very, very cryptic with his team news updates when it comes to injuries, as he always is. On William Saliba, he said we have to wait and see. Yesterday, he did not train, so we have an extra day between us. In other words, he meant today, for which they were set to have a training session after his press conference, and he said he would see. So he said, yesterday we didn't train. We have an extra day between this afternoon. Let's see if we can be available or not. It remains the same. If you ask me for the Everton game, I think he will be fit. For tomorrow, I do not know. In other words, Mikel Arteta is saying he guarantees that William Saliba will be available provided circumstances remain constant for their next game against Everton, which will come next weekend. There will be no midweek game for the first time in what feels like forever for some of these teams. Really, teams that are playing in the UEFA Europa League and the UEFA Conference League will have midweek fixtures. Then, I mean, for the last 2 fortnights, he's been telling us it's a matter of days for William Saliba. So it's really, really hard to, it becomes increasingly hard to take Mikel Arteta's word for it. But that's his nature. He's been very, very hesitant every time they've lost a player through injury to say the exact period for which they expect the player to recover. They no longer put exact timelines to it as they previously used to do. They will just give you a blanket statement. It's a matter of days, matter of weeks, and leave it at that. A matter of weeks could mean 12 weeks, which is 3 months. It could mean 16 weeks, which is 4 months. A matter of days could mean 15 days, which is a fortnight, really, and a day, So he's very cryptic in that nature. But that's what he had to say on William Saliba. On Yohan Timber, he said, again, it depends on how he feels today. It was a knock that he picked, and he wasn't feeling comfortable. So again, I think it's a matter of days. But whether it's tomorrow or not, we will see. For those of you that were part of our preview for the game against Arsenal and Wolves, I did say that if I were in Mikel Arteta's shoes, I would rather not risk Yohan Timber to feature in this game. In fact, even if the player convinced me that he is okay, I'd rather he be on the bench at the very best. Why? Because after Wolves, which is a very, very winnable fixture, even with their depleted second 11, you go to come up against very tough opponents. In teams like Everton, in between which you have Crystal Palace in the EFL Cup quarterfinals, after which you have a game against Brighton. Midweek, then you play Aston Villa in the reverse fixture, and then you play AFC Bournemouth for the first weekend of the new year. And then you have, I think, no midweek fixture, and then play Portsmouth away in the FA Cup. I hope I'm correct with the chronology of events, but I think I have not, gotten it wrong, So, but that's what he said. He's not too sure. He could be being sarcastic here or not trying to reveal his cards, but we know that Yohan Timber missed that game against Club Brugge, Then Declan Rice, he also said, let's see how he is today. He was ill. That's an illness. Normally, in a few days, it gets resolved, but we have to wait and see. On Leandro Trossard, again, he said, another one that is a matter of days. It sounds boring, but it's the reality, so we do not know. Leandro Trossard picked up a knock in their game against Bayern Munich, and he was withdrawn for Noni Madueke. Missed a couple of games in between and returned for the game against Aston Villa as a second-half substitute, and then he himself was substituted. According to Mikel Arteta, he picked up a knock in the same position or around the same body area that he picked the earlier one. So that means that there could be chances that Arsenal think to themselves, we do not want to risk Trossard, let him sit this game out entirely. And that would be the wise thing to do, in my opinion, because down that left wing, you have Gabriel Martinelli, you have the return of Gabriel Jesus. I'm not saying start him, but at least you have that option. You have Ebeleche Eze, even though he's not been very, very effective, playing as a left winger, but at least you have the options. If push comes to shove, you could even send Bukayo Saka to play off that side, So I think he's a player that they can afford to be without, especially if they're coming up against Wolverhampton Wanderers. So those are some of the injury updates for them. But of course, the fixture does come to early for Gabriel Magalhaes, Christian Mosquera, Kai Havertz, But they will be delighted with the kind of performance that Gabriel Jesus was able to put on when he came on in the 62nd minutes against Club Brugge. Had a couple of shots on goal, including hitting the crossbar, and his interplay looked sharp between him, Bukayo Saka, and Gabriel Martinelli. He looked very, very lively. He had, I think, even more touches on the ball in those 28, 30 minutes thereabout as compared to Victor Gyökeres, which raises the question, how come that Gabriel Jesus came on in those fewer minutes and got more chances than Victor Gyökeres got? Is it because he makes better runs than Victor Gyökeres? I really don't want to think it's about the better runs. There is pre-existing chemistry between Martinelli, Saka, and Gabriel Jesus. Let's not forget that. For those of you that remember the 2021-2022 campaign, and this is, no, in fact, the 2022-2023 campaign. Yes, for those of you that remember that campaign. Gabriel Jesus had just joined Arsenal alongside Alexander Zinchenko, So anyways, we'll leave that at that. Quickly, Elsewhere in Europe, what's there to come? In as far as today, like I said, Real Sociedad are up against Girona at 11 p.m. Union St. Cloisy will be up against Union Berlin are up against RB Leipzig in the German Bundesliga. Lecce are up against Pisa, while Angers in the French League One are up against Nantes. Then on Saturday, Atletico de Madrid are up against Valencia. Real Mallorca will take on Elche. Barcelona will be up against Osasuna. Getafe will take on Espanyol. In the German Bundesliga, Borussia Mönchengladbach will be at home against Wolfsburg. Eintracht Frankfurt will take on Augsburg. Hoffenheim will be at home against Hamburg SV, while St. Pauli will entertain Heidenheim. Bayer Leverkusen will take on FC Cologne. In the Italian Serie A, Torino will take on Cremonese. Lazio will be away to Parma. Atlanta will be at home against Cagliari, while in the French League One, Stade Rennes take on Brest. Paris Saint-Germain will be up away to Metis, while Paris FC will take on Toulouse. That's for Saturday fixtures. On Super Sunday in the Spanish La Liga, you'll have Deportivo Alves up against Real Madrid. Then you'll have Levante up against Villarreal. Athletic Bilbao will be away to Celta Vigo, while earlier on Sunday, Sevilla will be up against Real Oviedo. Now, there are reports circulating that Xabi Alonso will be sacked if they do not win the game against Deportivo Alves. Those reports are making the rounds. So let's wait and see what will come of that. It's not something I would agree with, but it is what it is. In the German Bundesliga, Freiburg will be up against Borussia Dortmund. Bayern Munich will take on Mainz, while Werder Bremen will take on VfB Stuttgart. In the Italian Serie A, AC Milan will take on Sassuolo. Fiorentina will be at home against Hellas Verona. Now, go and put all your money on Hellas Verona to beat up against Fiorentina. It's just too poor this season. Napoli will be playing away to Udinese, while Genoa will be at home against Inter Milan. Bologna will take on Juventus. In the French League One, Lyon will be up against Le Havre. Auxerre will take on Lille. Lens will take on Nice. Strasbourg will be up against Leyton Orient. Will be up against Lorient. Olympique Marseille will be up against Monaco in the late kickoff at 11 p.m. on Sunday. That's a very, very big fixture there for some of you that would really want to watch that one, So keep your eyes out for all that action that will be coming your way in as far as this weekend is concerned. Like I said, for those of you that want an in-depth analysis on the Arsenal game, the Chelsea game, go over to our morning broadcast, the Friday morning broadcast. You'll see it. I think its title was to do the it's called Premier League Match Day 16 preview, and then FIFA being slammed for their expensive match day tickets. That was the headline. You can catch it all up, or you can wait for us tomorrow morning, possibly at 11 a.m. That's when I intend to do tomorrow's broadcast. That's the time I intend to do it. However, I have a morning errand to run. Let me hope I can be on time to do that, to go back and revisit some of those fixtures. But should time run away from me, then I'll communicate. All you'll see. Just turn on your notifications, and you'll be notified when I do come live. In as far as those previews are concerned. But also, do not hesitate to let us know what your predictions are for some of those games. Do you think we're going to have some giants for this weekend? Sometimes you have a weekend where almost all big teams are losing their games or drawing games or dropping points, essentially. So do you envision that this weekend? Could it be Liverpool that drops points? Is it going to be Man City? Is it going to be Chelsea? Is it going to be Arsenal? Will it be Man United on Monday? Will it be Tottenham? Will it be Newcastle? So what do you anticipate will happen? What do you anticipate will happen? In those coming fixtures. Okay. I thought I had not read that comment, as it did appear to be as though a new notification, but it's an old one. Anyways, like I said, the Africa Cup of Nations gets underway 21st December. Our own Uganda Cranes have already arrived in Morocco. They were the first team to arrive in Morocco. They're going to play 2 games against a club, I think Rabat something in Morocco, and then they'll play on the 17th of this month. They'll play against Gabon in another test game for them to prepare to face off with the likes of Tunisia, Nigeria, and Tanzania in the tournament. I really have... I'll be watching Uganda Cranes with one eye closed because if I'm being honest, I'm not having so much confidence. I'm not feeling so much confidence in our abilities when we come up against those teams like Nigeria, like Tunisia, later on even our own neighbors, Tanzania, because they can cause you an upset. And yet you need at least a win and a draw to guarantee that you will leave the groups, either as part of the teams that finish within the top 2 or among the 4 teams that finish 3rd best. You want to put yourself in those frames. Anyways, guys, it's been a pleasure doing this with you for the last 1 hour. Like I told you, Fridays usually our broadcasts are shorter, strictly 1 hour because of other engagements are pre-planned. So thank you so much, Pedri. Thank you so much, Alex. Thank you so much, LFC, and every single one of you that has been part of this broadcast. Those of you that liked, those of you that didn't like, those of you that were with us for a short while, those of you that stayed with us for the entirety of the course of the broadcast, we do not take your love for granted. We appreciate you a great deal. So thank you so much for always dedicating the time to support what we do. Stay blessed, and I'll see you tomorrow. Have yourselves a blessed weekend. Good night, guys. Bye-bye.